Hello everybody, this is Derek with Programming with Derek. Tonight I want to take you through the basics of VBA, and so we're going to go through a tour of what VBA is, the programming environment and how to use it, and we're going to go through basic control structures and loops. So you'll get a basic computer science course crammed in with this, and so if programming is new to you altogether, you'll also be able to get a good start on that as well. So let's get started. So let's start by asking, why take the time? Why take the time to learn VBA? Well, you can do a lot with it. So think of a spreadsheet where you go ahead and you take all of the numbers from a report, and you go ahead and put them into a format that you can use, and you style everything and you color it and you do all the formatting and you put some charts in there, and you have to do this every single week, and it takes you like 3 hours to do. I actually had this situation, and because of VBA, I was able to take that 3 hours and trim that down to about 10 minutes. And the 10 minutes was primarily spent going over to the computer that had the data, getting it onto the computer where the data was needed and where the VBA script would be run, and then simply running the script. The script itself took less than 30 seconds to run. So 3 hours to 30 seconds, pretty good trade-off. Just to give you an example of what you can do with it, and we're actually going to get in at the very end and apply all of this, and you'll see exactly how to make this happen. But I just wrote a little bit of VBA code, and in just moments I can go ahead and run it, and I come up with that. Not that impressive, but again, think in the context of a whole spreadsheet that you have to edit every week, and you can go ahead and do whatever formatting that you want. Anything that you do here, you can actually make into a VBA script. And we'll go in and feature videos on how to model what you want to do and tweak everything and do everything else. But tonight I just want to give you an idea of how to go ahead and use VBA to your greatest advantage to go ahead and get your work done. So the first thing we want to do in order to get into the development environment is come up to our ribbon here, and we can right click anywhere on the ribbon, and we'll get that little drop down menu, and we'll go ahead and select customize the ribbon. So what will open up here are the Excel options, and all we need to do with that is come down here and select developer in order to show the developer tab. And as soon as we click OK and we come back to that, oops, there we go, we see up here developer, and so we can go in there and go over to that tab, and we can open up our Visual Basic Editor. So I actually have this open already, and it will open up the entire screen. Looks a bit like that. So right now I have Excel on this side, and then I have the VBA editor over on this side. And just showing the end of the code that did that script a little bit earlier. Let's get into the VBA environment. So at the top here, let's just get up there. Okay, so at the top here, this is your coding window or your form window where you'll go ahead and edit your forms. Over here we have the Project Explorer, and then across the top here are your toolbars. Over here is where you can go ahead and make comments. So if I wanted to do some code here, and then I wanted to comment that whole block, I can go ahead and do that, and it'll turn green. And in most languages or most editors, comments are green by default a lot of times, and Most things you can go ahead and change that. VBA you cannot. So those are comments over here. This is where we'll go to run our program. You can pause the program if you need to, and you can also go ahead and stop the program. Basic menu items up here, your file, edit, view, to go ahead and expose or hide different things, insert, format. Debug is probably something that's relatively new to you, and we'll go into that a little bit here as well. F8 is probably my favorite key as I am going through and debugging things. If I come down here, I can also run to cursor, and then I can toggle breakpoints, and we'll get into that a little bit later as we get into debugging. All right. Over here again, this is the Project Explorer area. So we have our worksheets that are available. We have the workbook itself, and then we also have the modules that I've created. So we come down here, and we'll go ahead and just select this workbook so I can show off the bottom part of this area. As we go down, we see the properties. These are all the properties of the workbook, and these can be changed. These can be set to true or false, or whatever the items are. And this window is completely contextual in that if you are working with form or form elements or like buttons, what you see in here will change. Over here, this is going to be very likely, well, I can pretty much guarantee, different than what you see. This is something where up on the view menu at the top, we can go ahead and change what is showing down beneath. And we can also position that and really put it anywhere we want to. So I can toggle the watch window on or off, immediate window, and locals window. Those are what those windows are down here. So locals window will show individual objects that are currently in play, or variables, and whatever the values are of them. Watches is something that you're able to control. So you can go ahead and, let's say you want to watch a few specific variables, or within an object, the property of an object, and see what that is. This can be really helpful as you're debugging. Immediate window, this is for when you want to execute a single line of code. And so as an example, I can do a message box, and I can do, message box, and I can do hello world. Hello world, by tradition, is the very first program that a programmer ever writes, and so it is appropriate to start with this. When I go ahead and hit enter on this, you see a box that pops up that simply says hello world, and I can click OK on that. Let's go a little bit further into the hello world program. So we're going to come back to the top here, and we are going to look at the code behind that. Really, it's not much different than what you just saw. It is that message box and hello world. VBA tends to be a little bit looser as far as languages go, in that you can also go ahead and put parentheses around here, and it'll run exactly the same way. We come up here, we run it, and again, you can kind of see it down here, but I'll bring that up, and again, we get the same result, hello world. Anytime you have code that executes, you have to put it inside of either a sub or a function. In this case, we have it as sub. Subs are void. They do not return any values. We started out with the sub keyword, the hello. The parentheses are there to indicate right now that nothing is being passed into it, but you can pass a value into it. So if I were to pass in hello world as an example from another function or sub, and then I said message box and the name of the variable that I passed in, that would work the same, and you would actually get the exact same result. Coming down here a little bit further, let's go ahead and talk about breakpoints real quick. I can go ahead and run to a certain point. So, for instance, I can go ahead and run to here, and I can go ahead and execute that code, and you'll see that it has not yet executed. Once I hit F8 or F5, F8 steps one step at a time, F5 goes to whatever the next breakpoint is or to the end of the code. And then when I hit F5, then I get the message box that comes up again. All right. You'll also notice indentation here. This is a good programming practice. So anytime you are doing loops or control structures or anything else like that, it's a good idea to indent it, and it increases the readability. It makes it a lot easier to see. All right, next item. Let's talk a little bit about forms. So with forms, we're going to come over here and we're just going to open a basic user form. Now again, when I'm down here and I come back to the bottom of this editor again, right now I have the form selected, now I have the button selected. And so you'll notice how the properties are contextual and they change depending on what you have open. Forms, you have a lot of different controls in there. Essentially anything that you see on a regular program that you would run that has buttons and drop down boxes and radio buttons and check boxes and all that other fun stuff, you can also do in VBA's forms as well. All right, coming back up to the top here, we also have modules. Modules allow you to break up your program or break up your code. So for instance, the first thing I wanted to show you was the hello world, and then we'll go into subs and functions so that I can explain that a little bit better. So let's actually take a closer look at the code itself. All right, so as we're doing that, first thing we have here, I'm actually just going to run this just so you can see how this works. But I'm going to step through it one step at a time. And again, that's the F8 key. So I'm going to start with this. I'm coming into main sub. From main sub, I am calling sub 1. So what's going to happen is it's going to go, okay, you want me to go to sub 1. Got it. So I come down here and I go to sub 1. I'm not passing anything in. I didn't tell it was getting anything. It's not expecting to receive anything. So it's throwing it, catching it. Next thing down here, I'm declaring a variable. I'm dimensioning a variable. We'll talk more about variables here in just a few minutes. And I am saying that it will be an integer. I'm setting the value of that variable, var1 is equal to 2. And then I'm going ahead and I'm taking var1, and you'll notice that when I hover my mouse over it, it says var1 is currently 0. I'm going to execute that piece of code. Now it says var1 is equal to 2. I'm going to pass var1 to sub2. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to receive var1. I do have to declare and say it is an integer that I am receiving. And then I will come down here and I'm going to set the value of my var to whatever I get back from func1, or which is going to be, of course, a function. So you'll notice as I'm stepping down here, I'm never actually hitting this end sub, end sub, end sub. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind. When you go off into another sub, you still have stuff below it. And we'll see that when we come back up here to the top. So we'll go ahead and we'll continue on here, and we'll come down here and we will go into function, func1. I am receiving var1 as integer. Now, I don't have to name this var1. I could name it my variable or receiver. or whatever I like to do. And that's a good thing to keep in mind, because then you can build libraries of code and you can pass it whatever you want to and have it process the information in the same way. Because this is a function, I have to pick a return type. And so I'm going to say it is as integer. Same way up here that I said dimension var1 as integer, I'm doing that down here as well. Now I'm going to say whatever the value is of func2, I want to set that to func1, and that's going to be my return value on the function. So now I'm going to come down here, func2, and I'm not passing anything over there. That's okay. Func2 is now equal to 3, and I can go ahead and end that function. Great. Now I came up here and I did that. Func1 I now have equal to 3 as well. Func2 was equal to 3. So func1 is equal to 3 also. All right. And then down here, I end the sub again. Haven't done anything. That is totally fine. Now I come back up here. Now, currently, var1 is 2. But I'm going to go ahead and change that to var1 being 5. That's no problem. Going to end that sub. And now we're back at our main sub up here. And ending that sub. And we're done with the program. So that's the basics of how subs and functions work. Next up, we have variables. So variables, there are a few things to talk about with it. First thing, the naming of them. They must be less than 255 characters. They cannot have spaces. They must not begin with a number. And it can be lowercase a to lowercase z, uppercase a to uppercase z, 0 through 9, and an underscore. Incidentally, you'll notice that on this line, when I have the underscore here, it is not green like the rest of the things. Reason for this, underscore is a special character in and of itself, in that at the end of the line, if you want to continue things onto the next line, you would use an underscore there, and that tells your VBA script that there is more to the statement that you're doing. Because VBA doesn't use any kind of control characters at the end of the line to know that it's the end, but it does limit how many characters you can go across. Sometimes you do need to go ahead and do that. You can also break commands up a little bit. Like if you have a huge string that you need to store, you can go ahead and keep adding and adding and adding to that string. So there is documentation on this, and you can check that out on the Microsoft site. And I'll just scroll over so you can see all of that. Now, coming down here, we have option explicit. What is option explicit? Option explicit says that I am requiring that any variable that I use, I have to declare first. So going back to that dimensioning variables where we had dim, var1 or whatever, in order to use var1, I can't just say var1 equals this. I have to have a place where I declare that variable. Public variables can be used and accessed from other functions, or excuse me, from other modules. Private variables and dimensioned variables cannot be. So that is important to keep in mind in when you're using variables. So why would you use private instead of just making everything public? Well, let's say you wanted to have a value of a row value and you just wanted to designate that as row or my row or whatever in a sub, but you wanted that to be tracked separately than what you have in another sub, and you want to call that my row also. That is totally fine to do if you scope it correctly. If you have that my row variable declared just within those subs, it works just fine. So up here, just to show off how this is working, we have sub init, and we are setting our public var to 1 and private var to 1. We're going to see a call to that sub as we go into the next module. So right here, we have caller. Let's just follow this through. So we have a sub declared. Right now, you'll notice that option explicit I am not using, and that does not matter at all anyway, because I'm not really using a variable on the fly. But let's go ahead and show that here real quick as well. So sub tester, and we'll go ahead and say my var is equal to 1. All right. And message box my var. All right. So now I go ahead and run this. It goes, okay, I got no problem with that. And message box comes up as 1. All right. However, now I'll go ahead and finish that. And now I will uncomment this option explicit up here. And now I will try to run this, and it's going to give me an error. It's going to say compile error, variable not defined. Can't do that. Again, that just shows you how option explicit works, that you have to have that in there in order for it to work. All right. Since my code is technically running, I can see that with the yellow arrow. If I try to delete that code, which I'm doing right now, it will remind me that, hey, that is going to reset your project. You'll see this message box every now and then as you're working on programming and debugging. And it is totally fine. It's nothing alarming. It just says, hey, I'm going to stop executing the code. And it just did that by me deleting and saying, yes, that's fine. All right. So subcaller. We are going to, first of all, call, oops, I actually am using, yes, okay. So I actually am using private var. So right here, I'm just going to uncomment that. This will likely be another instance. Yep, it is telling me I have to reset the project. That is fine. All right. And so we're going to go through here. We're going to go to my mod2vars1.init, and we're coming in here. We're just declaring our variables. Public var is 1, private var is 1. Great. I'm going to set public var to 2. That actually sets it in that module that I was just in, because right now I'm actually in vars 2, not vars 1. And actually, you can't see that right now. Let me show you that. All right. So over here, you have vars 1 and vars 2. We have vars 3, and we're going to get into more stuff here in just a little bit. But I just wanted to show you kind of where we're at right now. All right, let's go back to the code. So now I'm going to say message box vars 2, and I'm going to get 2. And I'm going to do message box private var. And when I do that, because I allowed for it to exist, but it does not have a value stored in it, even though earlier in vars 1 I declared that the value would be 1, it is not seeing that because it's a private variable to vars 1. All right. So we come down there, and that's all of our code. All right, continuing forward, let's talk a little bit about number types. Now to do that, we're just going to come over here to our other screen, and I'm actually going to make that a little bit smaller. All right. So let's come back over here, and we will go there. All right. So what we have here in any programming language, you're going to have different number types. And so with that, we have, for number types, the basic ones are byte, integer, long, single, double, and currency. So why have different types? Well, they take up different amounts of space in memory. So you want to use the least amount of space possible, just to be so that you can get the best performance out of your computer, so that applications are not wasteful. It's just a good idea. Now, there's a trade-off. So if you think, for instance, that your number is going to be more than the number 255, or you might have a negative number, you would not want to use byte. You might want to go to integer. If you think that's going to be larger than that, hey, you'll double the size of it, but you have much more room if you go to long. And so single gets very big, and double just gets absolutely huge. And then there's currency, and of course that's for currency. So declarations on that are simply byte, integer, long, single, double, and currency. All right, and I'm actually gonna switch this up a little bit. All right, and actually let's come back here. All right, and let's actually do this. And we're gonna unhide. All right, so we also have non-numeric types. So non-numeric types, we have two types of string. We have a fixed length string, and a fixed length string will take up less space. So the amount of characters, though, with fixed length is 65,400, and the space that it takes up is however many characters. So if you have 10 characters that you declare, it takes up 10 bytes. If you have 20, it takes up 20 bytes, etc. The way that you declare this is you simply go string times n, or string times the number of characters that you want to take up. So bear with me here. Unhide. All right. So next item, we have Boolean. Ironically, Boolean takes up more than byte, even though technically all you're keeping track of is positive or negative, 1 or 0, depending on the language, true or false. It takes up 2 bytes. It's still good to use, again, just for control, and you would just declare that as Boolean. Date, keep in mind with date how low you can go. You can only go down to January 1st of the year 100. So if you're talking about and you're storing data on the times of Christ or BC or whatever the case is, this is not a good thing to use. You can go ahead and use string instead. You can go all the way up to December 31st, 9,999. All right. Then you have the different object types. So you'll have range. Range stores a group of cells. So range could be a single cell. And so your range value might be C12. Range can be 2 cells. You can also have a range of ranges. So that's a range, and this is a range, and this is a range, etc. And that can all go into one variable. So we also have variant, and variant can either be numeric or text. As we'll see a little bit later on, there is an instance where you have to use variant. Variant is also the default type for a variable if you don't give it a type. So if you just say dim my var, and that's all you say, it'll just say, okay, I'm a variant, because I don't know what you want me to be. Now going back up to object, Object is a lot of different things. It can be a workbook, it can be a worksheet, it can be a lot of different things that Excel and VBA keep track of. So you'll declare it in different ways. You can declare it as simply object. You can declare it as workbook. You can declare it as worksheet. And so just to show this off here, let's go back over to the code. And so string fixed, again, we are declaring a variable dim fs as string times 10. We're going to say fs is equal to this very long thing. And let's go ahead and run this just so we see what happens. Now we're going to say message box, length of string of fs is, and we actually don't even have to run this. We can just hang out over here and we'll see, hey, it got cut off. Why? Because again, we said it can only have 10 characters. So if we want the string to be any variable, let's come down here and we'll go ahead and run it, or any length up to 2 billion characters, so quite large. And if we hover over this again, we'll see whatever I put in there, that's what it is. So I can again go 2 billion characters out. I can't think of anything that I would store 2 billion characters in, but you can. And that's nice to know. All right. Coming down here, object var. This gets a little bit interesting. So here what we have is we are, oops, I'll go ahead and actually, all right, come down to object var. All right. And so when you have an object, you have to use this set keyword. So I declared object var as object, ws as worksheet, wb as workbook. And then I'm setting ws to active worksheet. I'm setting wb to active workbook. But then because worksheet and workbook are both objects, I can also go ahead and say, hey, obj var is now ws, and obj var is now wb. All right, and I can say ws.cells to which is second row, second column, is equal to hello. And then if I were to go over here and look at that, I would see that execute and I would see hello in there instead. So that covers variable types. So let's continue on here and we will get into arrays. All right. So first of all, declaring arrays. The way that we do that is we simply come in and we declare a variable. So in this case, we're going to call it myAr for my array. We're going to say that the maximum index is 4. Now with this, keep in mind that we are not saying that it only has 4 spots. We are saying that's the maximum index. So arrays by default are declared for 0 indexed. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces to fill. Now if I do try to address myAr5 and set it equal to 5, I will get an error on that because it's going to say, hey, I'm not able to do that. So let's actually show you a little bit of debugging here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set a breakpoint on that line, and I'm going to start the code because that's where my cursor is. And I'm going to simply start the code. And it's going to run to that point. Now I'm going to hit F5 to continue running it, and I get a subscript out of range message. And so if I wanted to come in here and try debugging that, it would say, hey, this is the line that you're having the problems on. So I can go ahead and say, oh, okay, I didn't mean to do that. I don't want that to execute, or you can change the code or do whatever you need to do. So those are arrays, or the first part of arrays. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we are going to talk about redim, or redimensioning an array. So this is really convenient when you don't know how large your array is going to be. So what we're going to do is we are first going to say dim my r as integer. And so we come down here and we run this. And notice that I'm not giving it a size up here. I am simply saying, hey, it's going to be an array. All right. Now I'm going to say I'm going to resize it as 4 spaces. And I can go up to 4 here. Now, unlike before, I will not get an error now, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say redim preserve my R5. So what I'm saying is go ahead and redimension that array and give it a 5th index as well, or go up to the number 5. And then when I go ahead and come down here and I say my R5, or my R at position 5 is equal to 5, it goes, okay, I can do that. By the way, as we've been going through this, what I have not shown you is down below with the watches window. And so just to show you this, my R is stored here, and I can see positions 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I can see the values of each one. Okay. So that covers arrays. Okay, so next up we have operators. So operators allow you to manipulate values and also go ahead and test values. So we're going to come down here and we have a lot of comments. And here's the thing. With operators, it's fairly straightforward. We don't really need to step through this because a lot of this is going back to your elementary school days and learning about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. What you probably are not familiar with is mod. So mod, you actually have worked with before. You just learned it as remainder. So when you did 3 divided by 2 or 2 divided by 3, then you would have 1 remainder 1. Or 2 divided by 5 would be 2 remainder 1, or whatever the case is. So that pretty much covers operators. That gives you everything you need to really know about that as far as the arithmetic operators go. Now, there's also comparison operators. One thing of note is the equal sign is both assignment and comparison. So you may recall earlier that we said, hey, I want to set this variable equal to 2. Well, you also use it to see if something is true or false. So let's come back down here to the bottom part of our code, and we'll just give you an example here. And we will say message box 3 equals 2. And when I run that, it's going to come up and say false because, hey, no, 3 is not equal to 2. I can do 3 is greater than 2, and these are all Boolean tests. So I can run that and it'll say, yes, 3 is greater than 2. I can go ahead and check if it's less than 2 and run that and it'll say false. No, it is not less than 2. I can say if it is not equal to 2. So the way we do that is we do less than, greater than, and we run that and it goes true. 3 does not equal 2. I can do, I can also do greater than or equal, and I can do less than or equal. So I just did less than or equal, that's greater than or equal. So same thing there. And then I also have a special operator called not. And that just flips whatever I have in there. So if I have true in there and I run that, it's going to say not true is false. Correct. Same thing here. If I say not false and I run that, I will say true. Now, when you use the not, it does need to be a either a true or false statement. So if I said not to, interesting. Okay, so I am wrong on that. I am curious about how that works. Let's take a closer look at that. So for it to be useful, you really need to do it. But let's find out what happens when you do not 5. -6. Okay. So apparently it subtracts the... I'm not completely sure how that works with the numeric value, but it's interesting just the same. All right, so let's go into logical operators. So with these are and, or, not, and XOR. So that actually I kind of got into just a moment ago. Let me show you some quick table that I put together. And bear with me here. That's not what I want. That's what I want. All right. So first value is either true or false. Second value is either true or false. This is what's called a truth table. So a truth table defines what the results will be when you do different things. So when I do true and true, I come out with true. When I do true and false, or false and true, or false and false, that's all false. Flip it all, kind of. When you are doing or. Instead, if either one is true, then the statement is true. If both are false or all values are false, then the statement is false. Again, negating it is, it just flips it. And then there's also XOR. This is exclusive OR. It says that only one of the two items can be true for that to be true. One and only one. So if both are true, like on the top item, true XOR true, that's actually going to be false. So some things to bear in mind there. All right. So next item. Let's talk a little bit about concatenation. So concatenation, kind of a fun word. It is going in and combining values together. So when I put quotation marks around it, I have both string values. So if I do 3 plus 2, like I do here, then it is going to be 32. If I do 3 and 2, again, it's going to be 32. Now, if I do var and 2, it's going to be var 2. So if I did 3 plus 2, or actually if I change this to, let's actually come down here and we'll head on down here and plug that in. and see what happens. All right, so it has no problem with me doing var ampersand 2 to concatenate. However, if I do var plus 2 and try doing that, it says, hey, that's a type mismatch. I don't know what to do with that. So I'm going to give you an error. So for that reason, I generally lean toward using the ampersand rather than the plus. That way, when I know I want to concatenate, that way it guarantees that it's always doing it correctly. So that covers operators, both arithmetic and logical operators. Okay, so next up we have decisions. So this is where the real power of programming comes in, is how decisions are made. So let's come back up to our code, and we will go into the decisions module that I have set up for you. So the way this works is, in an if statement, it always takes this basic structure. It goes if whatever the condition is equal to true, or if whatever the condition is equal to false, then I go ahead and do some stuff. So I might say my var is equal to 30 or 23, and else if the condition is false, then my var is equal to 32, and then else my var is equal to 12. It doesn't really matter. Then whatever I end up doing, whatever I start, I have to end. So I end up going ahead and saying end if. Now, you can also do a select case statement, and that works very similarly, except instead of having to do if, else if, else if, else if, it's kind of a shorthand. And instead you go ahead and you have a value of a number, and you test that value, and you give it different criteria. So then you might say case 1 to 5, do this. Case 6 or 8, do this. Otherwise, my default is whatever it is, and then again, you end the select statement. So that really covers decisions. So with all that, that just brings us to loops. And so if we go in here, this is all of that code that I showed you earlier. The only thing I commented out was clearing the contents and undoing it all. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that back in there because it was a shorthand for me so that I didn't have to undo it during testing. All right. So, starting at the top, let's just step through this. First thing we're doing is we are declaring some variables. So I have a variable called I, an array called R. I have a worksheet called WS. And now my first loop that I want to show you is a for loop. So what I'm saying here is for I being equal to 0. In other words, I'm going to start this with I equal to 0. And I want to go until the number 9. There is an additional piece to this that you can add. If I want to do every 2 or every 3 or whatever, I could also add step 1 or step 2 or step 3. Just proof of concept here. I'll go ahead and do that as step 1 because that will actually accomplish the exact same thing. So now I come down here and I say right now I is equal to 0. I'm going to go ahead and do the next one. I is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to keep doing that and testing the condition. So now if we go to the bottom here, and remember before to do our array we manually set each one. Well, with a loop, you don't have to. You can go ahead and go through all of it and do stuff. So with a loop, just to show you what the what that looks like at the bottom part, we just go up here and we say our 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right. Right now, WS is set to nothing. Right now, my range is set to nothing. And we have another variable in there called decel that we haven't really looked at yet, but it still exists and it knows it's going to be in there. So let's come back up to our code. And what we're going to do is we are going to set WS as active workbook dot worksheets, whatever worksheet I have named sheet 1. And so it's going to go ahead and execute that. And now if I come back down to the bottom there, you'll see that now WS has some stuff in it. And in the locals window, you can really start to explore stuff as well. So you can come down here and go, okay, well, what is under WS? I have auto filter, I have cells, and in cells I have cells, and in cells I have cells. That one's kind of like a recursive infinite loop. I have comments, I have creator, I have filter mode, and just all sorts of stuff. And it's kind of nice to take a look at that and see how you can, everything that you can manipulate as you're working in VBA. All right. So next thing I'm doing is I'm saying ws.select. And what that's going to do is, if that sheet is not selected, it's going to go ahead and open it up and it's going to jump to it. And so let me actually just show you what that looks like here. I'm going to come over here and come back to the top part of Excel. And now when I run that line of code, it just jumps over. All right. So I'm also going to set my range equal to active sheet.range of A1 and B, or from A1 to B2. All right. Why am I doing that? I am doing that so that I can go for each decel in my range. In other words, I'm declaring a variable decel in range. The control variable on here must be a variant. It cannot be anything else for a for each loop. And I'm going to set that value to 6 question marks. And then I'm just going to come down here and say next decel. Let me just go down here and I'll just show you how the code is running. And actually, let's go ahead and just go full screen here just so you can see this real quick. So as I'm running through that, you'll see over here where the question marks are populating. And just to zoom in a little bit on that, you'll see right there, and I'll go ahead and run that last one. And it continues on. All right, so back to our code. So now I'm going to say myRange.clearContents. When I run that, it just clears it out. All right. So coming back over to the code, I'm going to set I equal to 2 now. And I'm going to say, while I is less than 10, I want to go ahead and give it a number. Let's just give it the number of I. So, and when I do this loop, always make sure to iterate. Otherwise, if I did not have this I is equal to I plus 1 in here, and no, unfortunately, VBA, for those who are familiar with other languages, does not have an option to auto increment and decrement with something like I plus plus and I minus minus. So you have to do the I equals I plus 1. When you use while like this, you can go ahead and end it with wend, W-E-N-D, kind of a special keyword. And so that's just going to go down here. And let's come back over to the Excel window for you, and you'll see how that's running. That's just coming down here and giving numbers. And just running it and running it and running it. And we'll come back over here. And now we're going to say I is equal to 2. We are going to do literally the exact same thing as far as the type of loop. The only difference is instead of while and when, we are going to say do while, and we are going to say loop. Now, what we're doing here is kind of a little bit different. We're taking the row and putting it into a column. That can be very useful to do depending on your application. So to show you how to do that, we are simply using ws.cells, and the first value is going to be the row, how many rows down you're going. Second value is how many rows over. So whereas on this side we are controlling the column that we're in and changing that with I, on this side we are changing the row that we're in, or the row that we're looking at and assigning to. And then again, we're just iterating. So if we come back over to our Excel window again, and we'll see how that works. We are simply going through and we are putting those values in. Whatever value is here goes over there. And in fact, just to show you here, if I change that to 654, hit enter. By the way, notice that when I edit that, all of this stuff goes gray. You'll also find that if you're editing a cell, you'll suddenly stop being able to execute code. So if you're breaking your code somewhere and then you're trying to continue on, then, and you're not sure why, check this. All right, so we'll go ahead and continue on with running this. And now we'll see 64 went over there instead. And we'll do 8 and we'll do 9. Now the test value in here, what we were checking on was the length of the cell, or the length of the text in the cell. And as long as it was greater than 0, I keep going. Once it's no longer 0, then I will go ahead and stop. And so now that broke me out of the loop. And now I'm setting I is equal to 1. And I'm doing the exact same type of loop one more time. And instead of putting my while condition at the beginning, I'm putting it at the end. What that does is that allows me to guarantee that the loop will execute at least one time. And so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to set the interior color. So I decided to just have some fun with this and do some different colors. And so coming over here, let's just show you that now that you've seen it run through the loop a little bit. And we'll go ahead and just continue on here, and I'm just doing some different colors there. All right, so next thing, we are going to come down here, and we're going to again start with I is equal to 1, and I'm going to say while, or do until I is greater than 10. So whereas while keeps going while the statement is true, until will go ahead and while the statement is false, it will keep going. So it will continue until the statement is until the statement is true. All right. So again, by putting it at the top, we are checking the condition first before we go into it. And so I'm doing a couple things here. I'm changing the color, and I'm also going ahead and setting the value to nothing. So I'm taking whatever cell I'm, not necessarily whatever cell I'm coloring. So let's actually just see this in action, because what we're doing is we're changing the value of the row, and then we're actually changing the colors going across. So if we come over here and we see that in action, we'll see that it is putting colors in. So it just put the color in, and then it took the value out. Put the color in, took the value out. So that's what that loop does. All right, so coming back over to our code, we have executing a couple more times. All right, and now I'm just doing the exact same thing. I'm just putting the condition at the end. So I'm doing a little bit more coloring and coming back over here to the code. You'll see that coloring happening. All right. And now I'm just setting the range A1 to J4. And with my range, I'm doing clear contents. So I go ahead and hit F8 on that for the next item. And I'm saying with my range.interior over here, I'm saying tint and shade is equal to 0. And so when I came over here and did that, all of a sudden the colors are no longer there. I need to go a little bit further here. I need to do the pattern on it is XL none. You may or may not be able to see the grid lines there, but when I do that XL none, now the grid lines reappear. And that's all of it. That is a lot of my very first computer science course that I took in a nutshell, put in the context of VBA. Well, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate it. I would request that you like the video if you found it helpful, and even if you didn't, just because I like to see the likes. Also comments. I love to hear from people. I want to hear what I can change, what I can do better. Right now, this is one of my earlier videos, so I'm very new to YouTube, and so I love to hear feedback. And then finally, please do subscribe, and that way I can continue to provide this kind of content, and quite honestly, I'll do it either way, but I like to see subscribers too. And it helps me know that I'm actually getting out there and helping people. So once again, thank you very much, and have a great night. Keep on learning.